your affiliation, sorry?
Bachelor number 1.
A farm. All kinds.
Where's your farm?
White Miller Orchards in Dummerston, Vermont, and we do a full array of fruits and vegetables, greenhouse, forestry, animals, integrated crops. We do a lot of different things.
I'm a community organizer and co-founder of Post Oil Solutions, which, as I said a moment ago, is approaching its 5th birthday. We are a community organizing group, which means that we're about relationships, building relationships with each other, as well as with the earth that we're part of. And we're also about empowerment, which is a very basic part of community organizing. Of people beginning to take responsibility for their lives and beginning to take care of themselves and their neighbors in ways that maybe we've gotten a little bit out of practice for over the last 100 or so years. You can go on, I won't go into many projects that we're involved with, but mostly we're involved with food sustainability, food self-sufficiency, food justice. And I think that what would make really for an interesting conversation tonight is to talk about the various hummingbirds that I know of and that are many of whom are sitting in this audience tonight. Because I think when you see a film like this, especially the darker side of it, it's very easy to become very pessimistic. Or even when you see the brighter side, you say, well, that's those people, that's not us, I couldn't do that. And I think it's very important to realize that, in fact, we can and are doing that. And there's a lot of things that are happening here in the greater Windham County area, the state of Vermont, New England, that are very promising. And I think that it's important for us to recognize this, because that's how we're going to move forward and be able to do something about the darker world that we are rapidly entering.
Amanda Ellis, Thurber, Lilac Ridge Farm. My husband Ross and I, we have a diversified farm in West Brattleboro. You guys probably know. Dairy and vegetables, salads, Christmas trees, sugaring. I agree with Tim. I also think that we should be proud of ourselves as a state. The state of Vermont, nationally, I think is really forward-looking, as we all know. But we were forward-looking before we figured out we were forward-looking, and now everyone's kind of looking at us, and I think that's really unique and exciting. And we should keep on doing it.
I'm Ross Thurber, and we have a diversified farm, similar, as Reed was describing, a lot of different activities. And one of the reasons we do those activities is it reflects the resource that we have here in our case, West Brattleboro. We have 600 acres of, not all of it's farmland, some of it's forest. We have about 120 acres that is arable. But we specialize in developing a system that is reflective of our resources so that we can also produce an economic crop. So in our case, we have 50 milking cows that we feed primarily on perennial grasses. We use our better land, more arable land for raising crops, vegetable crops. And then as you our farm creates elevation, there's a lot of glacial till and ledge, as we all know from this area. That's best suited for forest land, so we use that for forest land. And some areas, like Round Mountain, which some of you may be familiar with, is just pretty much purely a recreational, just kind of the summit, the top. In fact, in June, the Heifer Stroll weekend, we're going to have an opening of a trail that Brattleboro Area Trail System has helped create, along with some high school students and some family members. to have public access to a trail that sort of weaves its way up through some of our fields to the top of Round Mountain. And just another way of sort of appreciating the community, being able to farm in such a nice community, and also having a chance to educate people on how agriculture exists in what I like to refer to as a business park in West Brattleboro. A very green one.
As you guys continue here, I just want to mention that it's a challenging room, and if you can really try to speak up, I think we can help people. So it seems that, with this array of experiences and perspectives relative to soils or dirt, where did the film take you? I mean, just impressionistically, I know that some of us, this is the second time through, and for Reed, it was the first time through. What were those impressions that you had of the film? What was it saying about dirt, soils?
Yep.
And where did you make connections directly with, or indirectly with what was being said, or the messages, or what you were perceiving?
I guess I will start with a challenge. I've had the opportunity, I'm a little over 50. I know Ross's dad and listened to him when I was younger, and have a lot of respect for him and my elders. And what is in vogue now is what I've always done, and is what my family, my daughter loves, and my kids love, and will continue to do. And that is stay the course. 25 years ago, I can remember clearing a piece of land. I was on a big bulldozer, and I'm thinking, it takes 100 years to make an inch of topsoil. And I could screw it up right now if I do the wrong thing in the wrong way. And so I was very careful how I moved out that pine pasture to make room for more arable land. But my challenge to you is not folks like me, because I didn't learn much or get a lot out of this, because that film is my life. It's my life now, and it has been for 30 or 40 years. And I know that it's Ross's dad's life, because I grew up under his shoulder. So my question and challenge to you folks is to actually live it the way you mean it. Not to talk about it, but to actually do it, to live it. And if you do that, then you can have a real impact on being part of the conversation that was in that movie. And what I have personally is, we go through hard times, we go through good times, and it's life for me. And what we do is we try to keep things steady. It wasn't a disaster, it wasn't fantastic, it was just steady on. We tried to live the kinds of things that were there. So when I say when I was 19 years old, I was in the soils course those folks were talking about. So that's not new to me. I understand about the azotobacter, et cetera, and herbicides. There's a reason why I'm an organic farmer after 16 years now, and when I was younger, it wasn't the thing to do with orchard. You learn some things. But that being said, I challenge you to actually live it, not to talk about it, but to really do it.
In that one of the challenges that seemed to come up in the course of that film was from Wes Jackson, when he was talking about this being a kind of critical. I mean, you brought us here now. This being a kind of, from his perspective, a critical 120-year window, right? That it's now or if this is as weighty a moment as when humanoids were emerging in East Africa, right? So that's a pretty weighty claim. So is that something that you wanted to speak to, Tim, or you could speak to more in this idea of the challenge?
I'm more interested in what Reed has.
Yeah. Okay.
Quite frankly, because I think what you started and ended your comment with about walking the talk is where it's at. Unlike Reed, unlike Ross, I did not grow up on a farm. I did not know and respect soil the way he and other farmers have. And I suspect that I speak for a lot of you in this room, and it's a matter of reclaiming something that certainly my grandparents knew. And I think that's one of the challenges when Reed talks about not just talking about it, but doing something. Beginning to relearn the skills that we have lost. Gardening, putting food by, learning how to store food, being respectful of the land, raising animals. These are very basic skills, and what I've learned is I've become more involved in doing this and being responsible for my food, and having a food system at home now and doing it with neighbors that pretty much feeds me 12 months of the year, is that this requires a 4-letter word that many of us have become very adverse to, and that's the work word. It's hard work. And that, more than anything, is I think what we've got to relearn. That yes, there are skills that we've got to learn, and that's one of the things that Post Oil is about, is trying to teach people skills that we knew, 50, 60 years ago, but we've lost. But we've also got to get back to the idea of dedicating ourselves to the relationships with each other and the relationships with the land. And that takes effort. It's taking time to do that right. And that's, I think, in part what this is about. This 100 years that we've got, this is what we've got to learn.
Just to kind of dovetail on that and build, when you talk about, 2 4-letter words, right? Work and time.
There's a couple other 4-letter words in the movie
But
too.
those are all X'd out.
They incorporate themselves into the work.
Yeah, they make the
Same
workers
here.
too.
So there are 4-letter words involved in work and time, but beyond work and time that build dirt. Is that what you're saying?
It's something like that.
Yeah. Just trying to follow along. But in this part of this challenge that Reed has laid out for us here, that apparently involves 4-letter words, it seems that there's this trend, right, or this kind of vogue that dirt is maybe advancing, capitalizing on, or promoting. How are you, as people of the soil, right, people who are committed to this process, where do you take this film? Where do you say to an audience, how do you invite them into this challenge? And then I think that what I'd like to do there is take that as a moment to start inviting questions from the audience.
I thought something that was really validating about the film was seeing smaller systems and more intimate systems, farming systems, community systems that are relating to the soil, and giving them validation. Because I think as Americans, we are conditioned from a very young age to think bigger, more efficient, more productive, and that's what's happened with our agricultural system. And so in Vermont, where the land, except for if you're in the Connecticut River Valley, doesn't really lend itself to super large equipment or a monoculture, for example. It's never lent itself to that, as opposed to the Midwest. And so it's interesting to see that those smaller systems, those more intimate systems, those whether homesteading systems or, every farm is very unique. And sometimes I think probably it hasn't always been elevated or accepted or celebrated, those funky intimacies that we have with our soil, with our land. And so it was validating to see that in the film, that grow your food. It might be funky, you may have a funky system. You might do something by hand. It might not seem efficient, but actually if it's in the interest of soil, of preventing soil erosion, of feeding your land, then go for it. Keep on doing it,
Just following up on that a little bit. We have an interesting kind of position as smaller farmers in the efficient marketplace, and that efficiency to this point sets the price. And so we have to sort of be able to describe the sort of value of our product in order to sort of be able to garner the right place in the marketplace. And still, as farmers, human nature, all of it sort of comes to there's still somewhere in the middle where we have to meet consumers in the marketplace and say, well, this is, we're growing this, we're producing this milk this way, but yet we also want to sort of be able to provide something that is affordable too. But at the same time, we're also competing with systems that are efficient. And by the way, good people created efficient machines. And we see like combines and all that. Those are generally speaking good people with good intentions. It's not like the music does change when we see the combine going across the field. It gets a little darker, but if we can sort of focus that, when I look at our kids and think, when I see their sort of habits towards, creating something, hopefully that dynamic is a little, wider and broader rather than just, producing for production's sake.
Maybe this is where we open it up and say, any questions for the panelists? Yes, ma'am.
Corn is an important crop, and I'm wondering, do you see that diminishing in the future and being replaced by some other crop that might be even more beneficial?
Well, I feel sorry for a corn plant myself. I feel like corn in some ways has gotten a bad rap because of humans, and we've exploited it. And it's actually one of our own original grains here in North America. But on our farm, we used to grow a fair amount of corn for our cows, but we've gone all to a perennial grass-based system, which works really well. But I think corn has its place in the overall spectrum as far as how I think that we've obviously it's been documented that it's not really the right way to feed ruminants.
Corn is, all of us, everything needs two sources of food. You gotta have protein and you gotta have energy. Corn is the energy, honey is the energy for bees, but they have to have pollen, which is a protein. And so if you're dealing with four stomachs, i.e. cattle, sheep, you can do it with grass. But if you're going to overwinter something like pigs, something like chickens, you need to have some corn in there. So our corn production for grain is actually going up a little bit just to stay in-house. So what we do is we feed clover, turn the clover down and feed the corn. So we're not bringing in fossil fuels, because corn is an incredibly intensive nitrogen crop. It's all about fossil fuel. So if you can find a way to grow corn, which bear in mind that pre-World War II, everything was organic. So this system that we're trying to wean ourselves from is my father's system. I don't mean that he created it, but it's a one-generation system. So we're very close to remembering how and why these kinds of things were done. So corn in itself is not a four-letter word if it's handled in moderation. So on our farm, what we do is we feed vegetable waste. We feed, which we have a lot of at times, and we incorporate that into our animals, and then we make sure that we try to find the balance for the off-season, which can be corn and some sort of protein mix. And the way that we make that work is we're not raising 1,000 sows. We're raising the amount of chickens and the amount of pigs that our land overages will support. So we're not a pig farm. We're not a broiler farm. We're not layers. We're not. But if you come to visit my daughter, she can sell you a whole lot of things that all came from the farm, and there may have been a handful and a handful and a handful. So that's the change that we have made. When I was younger, I wanted to be big apples, and I was for 10 minutes. Literally, when we turned organic, we had half the production east of the Mississippi in apples. I don't do that now. That's not a story. That's the truth. And now it's, which crop? Do you want some pork? Do you want some chicken? Do you want some eggs? Do you want some strawberries? Do you want some apples? Do you want some cider? Do you want some vinegar? Do you want some applesauce? It goes on and on and on. And it's all right there on that footprint.
More questions? Another question? Just then to feed. Oh, I'm sorry, Dan. This is all that. In that?
I'm curious to hear a little bit about Reed's experiences advising organic farming of apples in China, because I think that there was a sort of a global perspective touched on in this film, and I know that you have some global experience.
Is that, back up a step. When I was younger, I was pretty full of myself, and I still have a big enough ego to get me through the door in the morning and get the work done, but I've had so much humility that's been developed since then. What happened was, in the 80s, the University of Vermont did a survey amongst all Vermont producing orchards, and in that survey, we had the highest yield and the lowest inputs of any farm, bar none, that raised apples. Okay, that's not my numbers, that's what somebody else. Because of that, the Chinese government hired me to consult for them on, and literally my charge was, we want you to help us mechanize agriculture so that we can move our agrarian population into the city to generate cash flow. And so while I was there, when I left as a farmer, as a student who knew that what I was doing was right. We were conventional, we did IPM, we did all the practices that everybody knows today, and we were good at it, and I thought that that's what you did. And by being there in another planet, if you will, in touching it and tasting what someone else was doing, which was completely different than what I was doing, what I was exposed to. It was different. I had no idea that what I was doing was so different, and I said to myself, I think I was wrong. If I hadn't physically been someplace where a whole other culture did something without the tools that I had, I wouldn't do what I do today. And so that one thing was what transferred me. It wasn't because I was smarter. It had nothing to do with that. It was just, I think I might have been wrong. And now that I'm here, I think I might be wrong again. But that's another story.
There seems to be something here that's turning back to this other part of the film, right? All about this extractive economies, all about mechanization, industrialization, and movements and displacements of people from the soil, right? I was wondering, maybe Tim, if this is your area, or if this is something that's connecting with what you're thinking and seeing after the film into this idea of a local global dynamic here, where we're talking about small soils and all what you're saying about possible funky possibilities, and then what you were saying, Tim, about you were talking about funky possibilities.
I was talking about funky
And Tim was talking about maybe the need to reach out and develop systems from where we are. So either one.
Well, if I think I understand what you're asking, I think that from my perspective and the perspective of others that are doing the kind of work I am involved with, which is basically called relocalization, it's seeing that the way to deal with a crisis that has developed in the last, last 100 years and has really accelerated recently, we have to really come down to a much more local level. We have to come down to a much more human level in terms of what we need to do. Our food, for example, needs to be something that we raise by ourselves, or that we support farmers like the Thurbers and the Millers and others like them around. We begin to remove ourselves from the industrial food system, where we're very dependent. Even a state like Vermont, which has, which we like to think is very advanced, still imports 95% of its diet, and that's an alarming figure when you consider how dependent we are for our food. And so the answer, from my perspective, is that we've got to become a people that can do a lot more to produce our own food, to feed ourselves. I mean, that is really the goal of the organization that I'm a part of, is to become increasingly a people that can feed ourselves. In part by supporting our local farmers, certainly through CSAs, through the farmers markets, through direct purchases from farms, but also we're learning to take much more responsibility for our own food by learning to do food in the way that our ancestors did. Farmers cannot feed us alone. If we're going to become a sustainable and self-sufficient people, we have to learn to feed ourselves. And what that means that we have to learn not only to grow the food, we have to learn to store the food, to preserve the food, so that in February and March we're still eating out of our gardens. Not being dependent on the supermarket. I think if that addresses what you're asking, I would say that becoming a more localized population that can do more for itself is what we're all about.
So I'm going to tag team on Tim's statement here, because going back to the hummingbird concept, after I saw this movie and I went to I'm on this farm to plate steering committee for the state level. Anyways, I got kind of fired up. I went into a 7-Eleven on the corner of my road, Greenleaf Street and Route 9, and my son, believe it or not, even though we have a dairy farm, needed a chocolate milk on the way home. I said, well, can we just wait to have a chocolate milk at home with our milk and Hershey syrup? He said, no, Mom, I got to have a chocolate milk. He's our third kid, so I caved in. And so I was looking for an organic chocolate milk. There was no organic chocolate milk. So I said to actually the woman who I knew was working behind the counter, do you guys ever have organic chocolate milk or Stonyfield yogurt? She said, no, but the manager's right there. So I said, could you sell some organic milk? He said, well, let me see. And he put it in his Palm Pilot, and, Gorelick is our supplier, but, I'll see. Gorelick, I guess Dean Foods owns Gorelick, but being that hummingbird, because I don't know that everyone can have their own garden. I don't know that everyone can do that, but to really, as a consumer, go out and say, these are the products we want. We want, hey, I'd like to get a local apple at my 7-Eleven or my Cumberland Farms. Why not? Why not? Why not be a small to medium, semi-large producer and have your produce at a Stop and Shop? Sell it at a Walmart, Shaw's. It's not impossible to penetrate those markets because they are part of our economy. But it's us to be the hummingbirds to say, we want this, we're going to buy it. We want to see, and I think we can make an impact. So somewhere in between there too. Because us local producers, we can provide you with food, but I don't know if we're big enough.
Dan?
Yeah, I'm kind of hesitant to make this comment that I'm going to make anyway, because I love and respect and I'm so grateful for what you guys are all doing and the approach you're taking, and basically like trying to rally encouragement around the hummingbird concept, and if nothing else, you just got to do it right, and that counts for something. That's better than not doing it right. But I also feel like it's kind of Pollyanna-ish. Maybe change can happen around the 7-Eleven in Brattleboro. And then you zoom back the lens on all the 7-Elevens in the United States, and then all the equivalents of 7-Elevens throughout the rest of the world, and it just feels so weighty and overwhelming. And the only thing that I'm ever left with when I'm thinking about these problems that seem so complex and overwhelming is that, yeah, we gotta walk the talk, but then there has to be large-scale, coordinated political activities, what it comes down to, because that's where decisions can be made that affect change on a large scale all at once. And
You're a
Is that a
worry.
question or a
I'm
comment?
a
You're an absolute worry. I tell you, give me that equation and we'll solve it. Because I've sold to all the customers that you're talking about, whether it's not 7-Eleven, but I've sold to 80% of retail space from New Jersey to Maine. And there's a customer that's talking with us now about wanting to convert their space to organic local vegetables. Martha, who some of you may or may not know, vends at the farmer's market and through their CSA. Her great-great-great-grandfather was peddling in the Brattleboro area. What she is doing, what I am doing, what my father did is nothing different than what we did at almost the beginning of time, only it was with a different tool. So people are going to still live in the same place, and your job, my job, their job is to sell their products as close to home as they can. And with fossil fuel running out, clearly the transportation is the issue. So when I sit down to grow something, I think, okay, China labor, China cheap labor. Okay, what can I grow that they can't? What can I grow that is their cost plus transportation? The equation is very, very simple. Just don't let it bog you down. Just do it. Okay? Just do it. Don't be intimidated by the simplicity of the equation.
Well, I think Reed has a point, but I appreciate what you're saying, Dan, is about you. And I think the mistake is to draw the telescope back and to take that larger view, because we can so easily be overwhelmed by how impossible it is. The problems are manifold. The disasters are all around us. And it seems impossible. Yes, the 7-Eleven over there in West Brattleboro sells organic chocolate milk.
No, they don't yet.
Well, they don't.
So all of you have
So
to
not
come in
even-
and
not even they
report,
sell.
please. Okay, please.
But what I'm saying is, and I think what Reed is saying, and Reed, you may want to correct me if I'm misunderstanding you, is that the important thing is to do it, is to be doing it. And if you're busy doing it, doing your best, which is what the hummingbird is all about, you won't have time to pull back the telescope and see, oh my God, are the people in China doing this? Are the people down the street doing this? You've got to take care of yourself. You've got to work with your neighbors, and that's all you can do, and that's doing your best. Don't sit around thinking about, is the rest of the world doing it, because it's a recipe for inaction.
Adam?
Yeah, part of this is great. Part of getting, of us all working with our neighbors and taking these little steps, and I can't think of another thing other than the snowball effect. Maybe there's I don't know, like a grass effect, grassroots effect, but to try and spread this out, what we're talking about is social change. And that sometimes happens with collaboration and with thinking about new ways to collaborate. And lately, there has been a lot of discussion about the creative economy. And people sometimes think of the creative economy, of connecting creative communities. And what does that mean? Who is being creative? It's not just artists. It's farmers. It's everybody is being creative. And the idea of that we are a creative community and talking about this, articulating it, starts to send waves. And this is what is going to, just the way Vermont is a leader and affects change. It can happen, even from little, small-sized Vermont.
Do you want to take that, or I've got a question right here, and then the gentleman right there.
I was going to say, New England has some unique varieties of vegetables and fruits that they can sell, which you cannot get in other parts of the country. In other words, and a good example is Maine has their lobsters. Would anybody want to buy a crab sandwich in Maine? They have something very unique. And I think among some of the apple varieties, some of the corn varieties, some of the other fruits, there's some very unique things which are sold at the farmers market by a variety of people. And you just can't go into the store and buy them. I think that's the ace in the hole.
I wonder, to what extent do you see rail transport as being part of the solution in the future, or is that really too awkward and not enough access? Would that be an improvement over trucking, or is that just not like this?
I love to go for a ride on a train sometime. Are you talking about rail transport for farmers so they can get away from the farm? No, it's actually really important for feed stuff. For the winter feed to supplement grass in the wintertime, hay bales. We also buy in some grain, but most of our grain comes in from Canada. Actually, it's the St. Lawrence Valley, just north of the Vermont border, sort of our version of the prairie here in the Northeast. And so that comes in by rail and then trucked around. But if I could just also address the social change issue and the sort of bigger picture. Our farms, we produce 700,000 pounds of milk. It's a small farm when you look at it. But we're also members of a co-op, Organic Valley, which is a nationwide co-op. There's 1,000 farms, dairy farms from Maine to Oregon that are all part of a co-op that was founded in Wisconsin. And the co-op makes $585 million in sales a year. It's a big operation. Because it's large enough, we can be a major player when it comes to setting a stable price in the marketplace, and also being at the table when it comes to making policy for organic rulings. For example, just recently a ruling came across to interpret grazing in a very specific way, because the original organic sort of ruling was cows have access to pasture. Well, you can imagine, you can interpret that in many different ways. Access to pasture could be a feedlot, essentially. So it was, through a lot of work with a lot of farmers in an organization that has a lot of different types of climates, too. Grazing in Vermont's different from grazing in Missouri or the West Coast. So we came up with a really, a national policy that is effectively closes a loophole for exploitation, basically. But there's an example of where we're just a small farm in Brattleboro, but we're connected to all these other farms that are cooperatively owned with the same mission of having a rural, stable economy, essentially. And the other thing that just strikes me out of all this is it's incredibly remedial to be talking about producing food and learning how to produce food, or putting food by, all those things in a postmodern society. I mean, it's just amazing. When you think about the idea of agriculture, at one point was to be able to have society flourish in sort of art and engineering, all those things. But yeah, we're still trying to figure it out in a sort of postmodern world.
Well, we just don't get gotten in our own way.
Yeah.
It's like you have to unlearn some stuff.
Well, what Wes Jackson said too. Incidentally, I've always wanted to see what that guy looks like. That's the first time I've ever seen him. I've heard about him for about 20 years.
Well, our families come from farming history or farming heritage, but my generation was the first generation that was totally removed from the agrarian society in this country. Therefore, my children are one generation removed. So we have folks that come by to buy my wife's preserves, et cetera, all the time, and they say, well, how do you do this? This is no rocket science.
Buy a cookbook!
Leave me alone!
So it's amazing how much we've forgotten. It's having walked 2 generations now from that agrarian society.
And how much we're intimidated by it. It's more than just not, as Mayo says, buy a cookbook. How people are just intimidated by that alone. It's really incredible.
It was really exciting once a diversity of crops came in, the mulches, the seeing what happened to the soil life, increase in beneficial organisms, a huge reduction in the some really pernicious weeds that were there, especially crabgrass, things that had been allowed to grow in an understory of corn for years upon years upon years. It was really exciting. So the field is really changed a lot, the soil has. And that's been really exciting to watch. And I think it's been exciting for Ross's father, too, to see, profit per acre of silage corn versus salad greens, artichokes, cut flowers, strawberries is such a big change. It's exciting. And there are other changes.
Well, I would say kind of an anecdotal change, and this is kind of the culture of farming. It's obviously changed. I mean, it's a hip thing to do now. I mean, you see these kids from Brooklyn moving up to upper state New York to, farm. So that's definitely changed. And an example of that, and sort of I feel like I've threaded two different worlds. Was a traditional dairy farmer meeting is a bunch of really clean, freshly showered farmers in a room, with fairly formal attire, And then I remember going to one of my first NOFA meetings, and it was like, the whole idea was everyone had to look like they just walked out of the barn. It was like street cred, farm cred. You still have a little sawdust on your pants. And it's just a fascinating kind of worldview and an evolution of where agriculture is going and been. But so culturally, I think it's different, but also our farm has changed and will continue to change as the more we learn and work on. But the way I look at it is there's a life's work to do there, for me anyways.
One other profound change has been the amount of invasive species we have here in southern Vermont. I don't know when the multiflora rose was introduced. Do you know when?
No,
But I mean, when you talk about like desertification and deforestation, it doesn't seem to be that much of a problem here in southern Vermont because we have a few invasive species that would love to fill in the gaps. Japanese knotweed and multiflora rose and bittersweet. And because we particularly have issues with those on our farm because we're an organic farm, and we have to use purely mechanical methods to deal with them, and they're really aggressive. And it's interesting. Other parts of Vermont do not have the problem, farther north. So,
What do you do with Japanese knotweed?
If I can interrupt that question, I think look, any further questions that people have, maybe you can come up and talk to the panelists individually. But we're losing so many good folks by attrition at this point. So I want to say thank you to all of you. Mike, thank you for